Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Owensboro, Kentucky. Welcome to my living room on this July 18th in the year 2026. Donna's here on the other side of the camera, and obviously here I am once again. It's nice to be able to come before you again. And I think I'm going to do something tonight which I don't think I've ever done before. And I hope you find it interesting. I hope you find it educational. I hope you find it inspiring and motivational. And I hope you see that how this story and the title of this story ties in with a beautiful parable from the mouth of Jesus Christ in the book of Luke. The beginning of this story, oh, by the way, we were going to start this video earlier, much earlier this evening, but for the last 3 hours or so, we in this area have been under a big-time severe thunderstorm. A lot of heavy rain, a lot of lightning and thunder. And I was hesitant to start the video until that storm just moves completely out of this area. I was concerned that we might get the video started and then a lightning strike somewhere would cause the power to go off. And Don says that if the power goes off, the camera just shuts down everything, and everything that had been spoken up to that point in time would have been lost. Just poof, gone. Well, I didn't want that to happen. So Donna and I have been sitting here, visiting, talking, reminiscing about things and discussing different ideas. It now seems that the thunder is distant. You may hear an occasional rumble of thunder, but I think we're okay as far as having to worry about a lightning strike and then the power to go out. Now, what I'm going to talk about here at the beginning goes back to, well, wait, before I start that, I just want to give a quick, excuse me, a quick thought about the situation of what's going on in Iran. For the 8th straight day, the U.S. military, under the direction of President Trump, has ramped up offensive strikes in Iran. We're hearing stories that they are hitting drone supplies, missile supplies, radar observation posts. We've even heard that some roads and bridges that would normally be used by the Iranians to resupply the IRCG units, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And it seems like we're not far away from actually bombing things such as bridges and power generation sites. It seems to me that Trump and the Pentagon have attempted to stay away from that, because if you knock out a power plant, it stays knocked out for, what, a decade or more? It takes a long time to build one of those types of units. And the idea has been, I think, that the present regime of the Islamic radicals would be replaced by a more normal system of government over there in Iran, and that the people would still have access to electricity and different projects that are like bridges. You don't build a bridge overnight. It takes a long time to build a bridge. But it seems like the Iranians are just totally unwilling to raise the white flag and to submit to the will of the United States. They are severely crippled militarily, but they still have some drones stuck around here and there. They still have some missiles and missile launchers. And unfortunately, we heard that yesterday sometime a couple of missiles which was fired from Iran flew all the way over to Jordan, hit a military post where American servicemen are staying, and tragically and unfortunately 2 United States servicemen have been pronounced as being killed. And then they say that a 3rd member of the armed forces is missing. Now, I don't know what that means. I have no idea. How do you miss somebody on a base all the way over in Jordan? And I must say, disgustingly, I heard on my television today, there was a Democratic liberal House of Representatives member who was saying how sad she was that the American personnel were killed. But she made it sound like that we had lost the war. Now, think about it. Wars are not nice things. You know, the old expression, war is hell. And in wars, people get hurt and people die. We mourn the death of those young servicemen. We empathize with the family members and the loved ones who have lost their dearly beloved. We honor their service, their patriotism, their bravery. We wish it wouldn't have happened, but war is hell. But to lose 2 soldiers doesn't mean you've lost the war. When you think about it, you know, in most wars, thousands and thousands of personnel are lost. And I think in this conflict in Iran, don't quote me on this, but maybe 16 individuals have died. And I don't know all of the reasons why they have died. I wrote my good buddy Guy a note this afternoon in which I said, I wonder how many servicemen every year die in accidental deaths as they're simply training for their different skills. And yet, you know, somebody doesn't throw up their hands and say, well, 2 young people died in a training accident, therefore we must shut down the military. You know, airplanes sometimes crash. Things sometimes explode when they're not supposed to. A car goes out of control. Things happen. That's a part of life. But dealing with the Iranians has become quite a chore. I think all of us should pray for our leaders. The Bible even mentions that idea. I think we should pray for the president to have wisdom. I think we should pray that our military leaders have wisdom and understanding. And I think we need to pray that the individual soldiers and airmen, Marines, that they are all protected. I have a feeling, and this is just a gut feeling, that the strikes in Iran are going to increase over the next coming week or so. And then maybe it gets to a point where there's nothing more to blow up. I don't think we're there yet. But I would just say, as a personal opinion, I felt this way back on April 8th. I still feel this way. And I think the events of the past couple of weeks have demonstrated that maybe it's a true statement. Back on April 8th, out of the blue, we announced, we of the Americans, that there was going to be a 2-week ceasefire to, I guess, explore the possibility of some type of peace negotiations. And that 2 weeks, that 14 days, has stretched into about 100 days. And in those 100 days of talks and negotiations, the Iranian radicals have demonstrated once again that they cannot be trusted about anything. As I once said to some of my buddies, just like the dogs that they are, they lie and they lie and they lie. In any agreement which is written down on a piece of paper has no value to it, even if they were to sign some type of peace deal. They will immediately go about the process of trying to break the peace deal. Now that's what history has shown. That's what 47 years of dealing with that maniacal, demonic regime has demonstrated. The Persian people, I feel sorry for. I feel sorry that they have had to live in a country for almost 5 decades where those religious, whacked-out zealots are controlling their country. And the leaders, they don't care about their people. You know, just before, a short time before the bombing of Iran began on February 28th, I first heard it was 30,000, but now you hear experts use the term 40,000. The Iranians killed 40,000 of their own people because they were voicing displeasure over the direction of their country. 40,000. Now, I don't hear any of the liberals expressing anger over that. But one little story about some horrible incident or accident, and they want to make a tremendous tidal wave out of it. But they don't even mention how 40,000 innocent civilians were slaughtered in the streets of Iran just before this conflict began. Well, do we know where it's going to go? No, we don't. It seems that President Trump has lost all patience with them. I get the feeling, and this is just me speaking, that President Trump has had 2 groups of people advising him. One group of people seems to be saying, we need to negotiate, we need to negotiate, we need to have a peaceful settlement, over and over. And then there's another group of more military-inclined people who say, Mr. President, we need to crush that Iranian structure and demolish that regime and allow the people to bring forth leaders to create a new system of government. And I think we've found up to now that the people who were crying for negotiate, 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 I think it's been demonstrated that their cries for negotiation were worthless. All it did is allow Iran to bring in more supplies, to restock, to rearm, to refortify. So it seems like President Trump is just done with trying to deal with them until they can just be, until that regime collapses. Now, how far will he go? I don't know. But like I said earlier, we need to pray that President Trump be given from the throne of God wisdom on knowing what to do. So, I just wanted to say those things quickly, and we are very sorry for the death of those 2 or 3 soldiers or airmen that just happened, I guess, yesterday. Now, let me get a quick drink of water, sort of change the mood a bit. That's, the talk of war is dark and heavy. The next part of what I wanted to talk about tonight goes back to a book, a small book that somehow my father found many decades ago. It seems to me it was about 1967 or 1968 that somehow my dad found a book. And I don't know how he found it, where he found it. I don't know that story. I don't remember it. But he found a book entitled The True Tales of the South at War. Now, that original book, which was published back in 1961, I was only 11 years old in 1961. But a few years later, I found Dad's copy. And that original book, I have no idea what became of it. I don't know if it's in a box up in the attic or whether it got thrown away. I have no idea. But a few years ago, that popped into my head, that book. And one particular story, which I have never been able to forget, came to my memory. And I started looking around on the internet, and thankfully, lo and behold, I found a copy. And this is the copy. Don, can they see that?
Yes.
True Tales of the South at War. The subtitle, How Soldiers Fought and Families Lived from 1861 to 1865. And these stories, were collected and edited by Clarence Poe. And you can see, can they see the rebel flag and the soldiers coming over a fence?
Raise it up a little bit. There.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was always on the cover. Well, the last story in the book is entitled A Prodigal Soldier's Return. Now, I thought about just telling you about that story, giving you my version or synopsis of the story. And I thought, I think you would do it an injustice, Michael. I think the only way that you can present this is by reading the actual story as it was written down way back in the 1800s following the Civil War. The story is entitled, if I did not say so, A Prodigal Soldier's Return. Now that's a takeoff of a phrase we often hear in the Bible, in the book of Luke. In fact, it's chapter 15 in the book of Luke, of what is often called the prodigal son's return. But this is a prodigal soldier's return. Now I must tell you folks, I have never been able to read this story, and I've read it many times, where I have been able to keep my emotions under control. There is something about this story that just hits me in the softest part of my heart. In the opening prayer before we turn the camera on, I asked Jesus Christ to help me to not to become emotional. Because if I became emotional, it would disturb your ability to hear the story. So I'm really going to try. Now, I may have to stop at a point or two and just give myself a chance to keep everything under control. Let me put my reading glasses on. The story is about a young man who is named Tim Cude, C-U-D-E. Now, I must profess, I've never heard that last name before. And here's the introduction to the story. No picture of the Civil War could be complete unless it included the father and mother of the son in uniform, often waiting for a too long delayed return. Sometimes the soldier had never learned to write, and he depended upon some oral message, possibly lost in transmission. At any rate, not a few soldiers far from home returned months later, and in some cases a year or so after the war, with no advance word to wife or parents or family. With charm and authenticity, Dr. J. Frank Dobie of the University of Texas here reveals what war meant to one such waiting couple in Pioneer, Texas cattle country, a true story sent out for special inclusion in this volume. So keep in mind, this is a true story. This is the recounting of a true story. This is how it begins. Not long after Texas joined the Confederacy, a youngster named Tim Cude from Live Oak County enlisted. Although he was only 16 years old, his way with oxen was a community wonder, especially the power of his voice over them. It was a voice young and lush, but strong without the gosling quality. He did not charm the oxen by whispering, horse charmer style, in their ears. Brendel and Whitey were his wheelers. I am presuming that the wheelers mean the two oxen which were closest to the wagon or the cart. Sam Houston and Davy Crockett, both famous in Texas history and Texas lore, were the leaders. Obviously, the front two of the oxen. They were steers of the old-time Texas Longhorn breed, and they could pull a log Just a second, let me make sure I get the right page here. I think I have 2 pages. Yes, I did. They could pull a log out of its bark. When Tim commanded them that they would go to their places to be hitched to wagon or plow, Tim was partial to Brendel. And when he put a hand over the oxen's head, the ox would often show his pleasure by licking out his tongue. The 4 oxen were the last inhabitants of the little crude ranch that Tim told goodbye when he felt the need to fight the Yankees. He was an only child. He had no brothers, no sisters. So he meant everything to his parents. He did not realize what emptiness he left behind him. He seldom wrote to relieve it. My nose is itching, excuse me. Months after Appomattox, which was the official signing of the ending of the war, General Robert E. Lee meeting General Grant, who was in charge of the Union forces, and they met at the Appomattox courthouse. And they met in the house of a family that once lived at Bull Run, or Manassas. This same family left Bull Run and Manassas in Virginia to move down south to get away from the war. As it turned out, the war ended in their living room. That's a unique, I'm adding that to the story. Months after Appomattox, his mother and father learned that he had been alive at Lee's surrender. More months, then a year, then 2 years dragged by, and still Tim did not come home. So now that means he's 6 years after he left home. He left home at age 16. Now he's 22. And there was no word from him. At first, his father and mother talked with high hopes of his coming home. Then gradually, they came to say little, even to each other, about his return. They still nursed a hope, but the heavy conviction settled down on them that Tim must be among the many boys in gray who would never come back home. Their hope grew gray and secret, without confidence. The days went by as slow as laboring oxen walk. In the late spring of 1867, so again, now we're 6 years later, Mr. Coode put a few beeves in a herd going north. Beeves, I think, is a reference to beef cattle. 6 months later, the owners of the herd returned and paid him the first money he had seen in years. The aging couple needed to buy necessities. Excuse me, folks. My nose is tickling me to no end. Don, would you quit tickling my nose? Let me sort of... I don't know what's causing that, but it's driving me a little nuts. Okay, where was I? In the late spring of 1867, Mr. Coode, put a few beeves on a herd going north, so he had a few extra cattle, sent them to join another group. 6 months later, the owners of the herd returned and paid him the first money he had seen in years. The aging couple needed to buy necessities, but Mr. Coode had a hard time persuading Mama to go with him down to Powderhorn on the coast for the purchases. Tim might come while we're gone, was her only argument. So we have these parents who are just wishing and wishing and hoping. that their son would return home following the war. Mr. Cood's argument that if he came, he would stay until they got back had slight weight with her. She wanted to be there. Mr. Cood would not argue, not even to himself, much less to her, that Tim would never come home. That's what they both thought. But neither was willing to say out loud. But he often reasoned gently that it was better for both of them to be resigned. It was in December before Mrs. Cood finally consented to go. They took a load of dry cowhides, so now we're just about into 1868. Mrs. Cood finally consented to go. They took a load of dry cowhides with them, and as the oxen pulled them south at the rate of about 2 miles an hour, they went over their plans again and again for spending the money. The plans cheered them. They would buy sacks of real coffee. Back during those distressed times, many people used the bark of certain trees as a substitute for coffee. But they were thinking about real coffee and a new coffee grinder that would do away with the labor of pounding the grains held by canvas with a hammer. They would buy sacks of flour and have real flour bread. You remember how Tim always likes flour gravy, Mrs. Cood said, and sugar for cakes and pies. She would have enough calico for 3 new dresses and a sunbonnet, besides a tablecloth, and he would have new boots, a new hat, and breeches, and percade for sewing into shirts, percale. I'll get some blue for Tim, Mrs. Cood said. There would be a new plow for the corn patch and lumber for a gallery to the frame house, so hot in the summer. They needed chains, axes, many ordinary things. So they had a long list of items they needed to buy that they hadn't been able to buy for almost 7 years. It took them a week to get down to Powderhorn, and then 2 days to buy everything and load the wagon. On the way back, Mrs. Cood kept wishing they'd make better time, but the 4 old tortoise-stepping oxen never moved a foot faster. Perhaps Tim came home today. Mrs. Cood would say at the evening camp, I dreamed. This story does it to me every time I read it, folks. There's something about this story that touches me. I think I can feel what those parents felt, what they'd gone through. The horror of realizing they probably had lost their son. I dreamed last night that he came just after dark. She'd say over the morning campfire, always burning long before daybreak. In all the dragging months adding themselves into years, no day had dawned or night fallen that she had not made some little extra preparation for her boy coming home. In all the period of waiting, this was the first time she had not been there to welcome him. I think meaning in her imagination. As she approached the waiting homestead now, the hopes of more than 14 absent days and of more than 14 absent nights were all accumulated into one hope. Perhaps Tim had come home. Mr. Coon shared the hope too, but it hurt him to see Mama disappointed, and he never encouraged daydreams. At last, they were only 6 miles away from home. Time out. My nose is itching up a storm. Don, would you please take that feather away from my nose? Let me... I don't think I've ever had my nose to do this before, Don. It's just itching and itching and itching. If I die of some terrible virus in the next couple of days, you'll know what got me. At last, they were only 6 miles from home. Turning the page. Christmas was only 3 days away. Then in a mud hole at the crossing of La Pera Creek, the oxen stalled. Now I got to give you a little time out here. After I graduated from college out in California, I was looking for a job. And I ended up on the campus of a small school in western Arizona that was called La Pera, or La Pera. I get the feeling these are probably the same words. So then a mud hole at the crossing of La Pera Creek, the oxen stalled. For an hour, Mr. Coon struggled and worried with them, trying to get them to make the supreme pull. Mrs. Coon threw all of her strength on the spoke of one wheel. Finally, Mr. Coon began to weary business of unloading some of the freight and carrying it onto his back up the bank of the creek. Then suddenly, they were aware of a man dismounted from a horse beside him, standing on the bank just ahead. Being down in the creek, they could not have seen his approach. His frame, though lank, was well filled out, his face all bearded, his clothes nondescript, and his posture was something of a soldier. Nearly all Southern men had in those days been soldiers. For a second he seemed to be holding something back. Then he gave a hearty greeting that was cordially responded to. The young man said, "Those look like mighty fine oxen." Coming down the bank of the creek, the stranger in that country at that time would come to help anybody in a tight spot. "Those are good oxen, but they won't pull this wagon out now," Mr. Coon answered. "I guess they're getting old, just like us, and can't. We've been working them since before the war." The stranger had moved around so that he was very near the wheel oxen, which he faced, instead of the driver and his wife. His hand was on Brindle's head, between the two rough horns. And the old ox, whose countenance was the same whether in a bog hole or a patch of spring tallow weed, licked out his tongue. The young man said, "I believe I can make those boys haul the wagon out." "They won't do any better for a stranger than for their master," Mr. Coot answered. "There's only one person who could get them to pull," added Mrs. Coot. "That's her boy who went to the war." Did he know oxen?" the young man asked out of his beard. "Oh yes, and they knew him. They liked him." Then for a little while there was silence. As Mr. Coot began drawing up the rawhide whip, again the stranger asked for a chance to try his hand. "Very well," Mr. Coot agreed slowly, "but every time you make them pull hard and they don't budge the wagon, they're that much harder to get against the yoke the next time." The young man asked the names of the oxen, and he got them. Then he took the long whip, not to lash the animals, for that was not the whip's function, but rather to pop it. He swung it lightly and tested the popper 3 or 4 times, as if getting back the feel of something long familiar that had been laid aside. Don, time out. Do you know why whip pops?
The leather hits the leather and it
No.
faster than sound.
It breaks the sound barrier.
Yeah, sure.
You take a long whip and you get it swinging, you actually approach the sound barrier, and then that final snap, it goes over the sound barrier, and what you're hearing is a miniature form of is like a jet airplane if it was going over the speed of sound. Now where was I?
Practicing on the whip.
The young man said, "Did he know oxen?" And the young man asked out of his beard, "Oh yes, they knew him and they liked him." Then for a little while there was silence, as Mr. Coot began drawing up the rawhide whip. Again the stranger asked for his chance to try his hand. "Very well," Mr. Coot agreed slowly, "but every time you try to make them pull and they don't budge the wagon, they're that much harder to get to pull against the yoke the next time." The young man asked the names of the oxen, and he got them. Then he took the long whip, not to lash the animals, for that was not the whip's function, but rather to pop it. Don, wasn't there a TV show way back when we were youngsters
Rawhide?
called Rawhide?
Yeah.
And didn't they have a whip?
Yeah.
Okay, that just popped into my head. He swung it lightly and tested the popper 3 or 4 times, as if getting back the feel of something long familiar that had been laid rawhide through the air. And the ringing crack made the sky brighter. At the same time, he began calling to the oxen to come on and pull. He talked to Brindle and Whitey, and then to Sam Houston and Davy Crockett. harder than a crapshooter talking to his bones. Have you ever played craps, Don?
No.
Well, the oxen, without a jerk, lay slowly, steadily, mightily into the yokes. The wheels slowly began to turn. The whip popped again like a crack of lightning in the sky. And the strong voice rose, pleading, encouraging, confident, dominating. The oxen were halfway up the bank now. They pulled on out. But nobody was talking to them any longer. For with a shout that rang to the Texas heavens, the Coods recognized their son. Who could handle oxen as no one else on earth. And no welcome of feast and fatted calf ever overwhelmed a prodigal son like that. Initiated by 4 faithful old oxen, which Tim Cood received from his mother and father on the banks of an insignificant creek in the wilderness of mesquite and prairie. I have loved that story since I was a teenager. And not once have I been able to read it without becoming deeply emotional. Do you sense the emotion in that story, Don?
Uh-huh.
I think anybody who has ever loved someone and they have the fear that they have lost that loved one by whatever reason. Maybe the loved one wants nothing more to do with them. Maybe death or disease has taken them away. But folks, when it's all said and done, as I look at things from my perspective, there are only 2 things in life worth living for. It's not money. It's not fame. It's not importance. It's not a career. It's not receiving some honor from your peers. The only 2 things which are truly worth living for and experiencing is having within one's life the true love of God Almighty and Jesus Christ, and that includes the Bible. That's one thing. And the other thing is having people in your life, whether they're blood relatives or not, just people which you have run across in the course of your life, that you know that you deeply love. It's the only thing that really matters. And I think that feeling has been in me for a long, long time. And that story sort of captures that idea of mom and dad, Mr. and Mrs. Cood, who lost their 16-year-old son to a war they had nothing to do with. But he felt duty-bound to go join his comrades. And the love that a son had for his parents. But it doesn't have to be familiar. It doesn't have to be mother, father, brother, sister. It can be any combination of human beings that touch your life and make your life better. No money can buy that. No reward is greater than that. And then, after having in your mind the unspoken thought that you have lost that person and you don't understand why. You don't know why. But deep down inside, even though you're wishing and hoping and wishing, you think they're gone. They're in a grave somewhere. Or you're never going to see them again. And then to be reunited with them. There's nothing sweeter than that story. Thinking about this idea just a bit, I've got a question for you, Don.
What's that?
On the day that you were born, was there any evil in you?
If it did, I didn't know anything.
Okay. Had you ever done anything wrong on the day you were born?
Not that I know of.
Maybe you kicked your mother's stomach from the inside
Maybe.
out. No, you were innocent. You were a human being and recognized by God Almighty and Jesus Christ as a potential eternal brother and son. And you were perfect in their eyes. Now, Don, let me ask you another question. You don't have to give details.
Okay.
That would make you uncomfortable. Knowing you, I couldn't get you to say it anyway. In the course of your life, did you betray your Heavenly Father and your Heavenly Brother's trust in you?
Oh, yeah.
We all have, haven't we?
I think so.
As Paul wrote, quoting from the Old Testament, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All people. Don, a story just popped into my head.
Uh-oh.
Once upon a time, I was a part of a church organization of which I am no longer associated. I was deemed unworthy of them because I gave a sermon, I've told this before. At their headquarters church, I gave a sermon entitled, "Look to Jesus, Not Moses."
I remember that.
Were you there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And the leader of that little group why, that just rankled him to no end. Because he was, well, between you and me, Don, I don't think he had much of a religious basis at all in him. Now, you got to be around him a few times. Is what I'm saying irrational?
No.
Can you understand me saying that?
Yeah.
And I go by Jesus Christ saying, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." He said that more than once. And I've never seen the fruit of God's Spirit pouring out of that man. He's a spoiled brat, always has been, always will be, in my opinion, most likely. The only person he loves is himself and his son and his grandchildren. I guess maybe the son's wife. But it's all personal. He is attached, dedicated, and worships at the altar of far right-wing politics. Now, folks, I can't control your political thoughts. Don, do I try to tell you what to think politically?
No.
No. Your opinions are what your opinions are. Yet you can't be around this fella without him just pounding and pounding and pounding on far right-wing political stuff. Now, I don't mind having a good political debate every now and then, but quite frankly, that's not what I really like to talk about. If you want to know the truth, I love to talk about the Bible. I love to talk about Jesus Christ. I love to talk about the soon coming kingdom of God. I love to think about the idea that someday this mortal human being will be changed to an immortal member of the family of God. Well, yeah, I gave that sermon. It was the right thing for me to give. It's what Jesus Christ wanted me to say. But that didn't fit with the spoiled brat's thinking. Because I wasn't adhering to long historic church traditions. Now, if you don't know anything about me, folks, I basically abhor church traditions, no matter where they come from. I hate the traditions of modern churchianity, what I like to call false churchianity. I have no use for them. I want nothing to do with them. You know, I was telling Don while we were waiting for the thunderstorm to pass by that I have times where Mormons out in Arizona have wanted to make me into a Mormon. Well, they didn't succeed.